Jonathan, welcome to Washington Times Higher Ground. I'm excited to get to connect with you here. You and I have connected a number of times in the past here. You have an incredible story, but I want to start with the really exciting development that you have, and it's the launch of your clothing line, UNITUS. Tell us a little bit about this.
Billy, I appreciate you so much for having me. And honestly, I really do see it as so much more than a clothing line. Really, the heartbeat behind it for me is developing a community of people who are, one, willing to stand up for what they believe in, but also do it in a way that I think hasn't been done in a long time, which is it's not about hating anybody. It's not about going against anybody. It's about saying our values are valid and they're valuable to us. And so we'll celebrate them through what we put on our body and how we spend our money at the end of the day. And so really UNITUS for me is just looking out into the marketplace and saying there is not a sports and apparel company that stands for my values. And so instead of just complaining about the way that a lot of these companies are moving away from godly principles and values, constitutional principles and values, I wanted to do something about it. And so UNITUS was taking the values that I hold dear in my personal life, faith, family, freedom, and a plethora of other ones, and putting them on a pedestal through really dope, in my opinion, really dope merch, and allowing people to join the community and wear their values on their sleeve and not be ashamed of them.
Yeah, and I'm going to tell you, I was at your launch event in Florida, and it was pretty incredible. I mean, the quality of everything that you guys are putting out, it's amazing. I think it's going to be a huge, you're going to have a competitive edge, I think, over a lot of the other companies that are out there. And it's coming at a time, I mean, look at all of the backlash over, Bud Light, over Target. I mean, there are a lot of businesses, and look, those businesses, they have the right to stand for what they want to stand for, but they have faced a lot of pushback because of what you just said. I think a lot of people out there, Christians and conservatives, they're looking for brands that they can invest their money in and like you were saying, feel good about it. You couldn't have predicted really a better time to launch your company, right? I mean, look at it.
And actually, we've been working on this for 2 years now. And so 2 years ago, our society, it was moving in that direction, but it wasn't completely at the place that it is now. And so it really was about, it wasn't just about seizing the moment. Oh, companies are doing this. Let's start something very fast ourselves. It was about how can we go about slowly and properly creating this community of people. And it just so happened that at around the time that we launched, we were at the height of a lot of what we're dealing with in our society today.
Yeah, it's just like God's timing, right? And how things work out. And, your story is one, and people know this story. And if they don't, we can kind of briefly recap it. But, when the George Floyd protests broke out, you didn't take a knee. You were the only team member on your team that didn't take a knee. You went viral. It became an international thing. And that's a tough thing to do, standing up and standing out. What have you learned throughout that process, in that moment, but also you've had a lot of time to reflect and talk about this. You've written a book on it. What have been some of the big lessons you've taken away?
I would say the number one lesson for me has been community. In that moment, I was standing alone, but I know in my personal life, and it explains it in the book, If You Get It, Why I Stand, it explains that it took so much more than just me. If I didn't have the people that I have in my life, if I didn't have those close around me, encouraging me, standing with me, not in the moment, but just in other ways, standing with me, encouraging me, I wouldn't have had the courage to stand in that moment. And so even when it comes to UNITUS, even taking it back there, I know what it's like to stand alone for something. I know what it's like to feel lonely and feel like you're the only one in the room with a specific set of ideals and values. But being able to create something where people can come together and find community and say, well, I believe these things, but here goes somebody else that believes the same thing, and we can stand together. And so I'd say that's probably the biggest one for me looking back. Is just like, I thank God for the community that he's given me. And I would say another one is the necessity of standing. After I decided to stand, I've had so many conversations with people, with Christians even specifically, saying that they were emotionally charged in the moment and may have not gone about it the right way. But then just the necessity of standing up in that moment when you're faced with a trial, when you're faced with something that is in your face, it's necessary for you to stand, because the times that it's only going to get darker and darker, what we're dealing with is only going to become more and more pervasive. And so the necessity of standing is only going to become more and more necessary. And so I thank God that I was able to stand in that moment. But it definitely speaks to the moments that are going to come where we're going to need to continue to stand. and we're going to need to be strengthened and encouraged to do so.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been covering a lot of stories lately, and these are stories that even 5 years ago, if somebody had told me this stuff was going to happen, I would have been like, no, you're crazy. Like, that's not going to happen, right? And we're sort of in this weird arena. When you say, hey, it's going to get harder, people are going to have to really be prepared to stand, you're not joking. I mean, we're seeing people in the UK silently praying, right, outside of abortion clinics, and they're being arrested. We're seeing this all over. We don't even need to go case by case. We know that it's happening. And I think that's 100% true. And we also have this culture where I think a lot of people are afraid, right? They have that fear. You mentioned some people maybe not reacting right, getting over emotional or handling things wrong. On the other side of that, I think there's people who don't react at all, and they're fearful because they don't want to be canceled or they don't want to deal with the fallout. What would you say to encourage people who maybe are in that second camp? They're being quiet and they're kind of just watching because they don't want the negative repercussions of speaking out.
Yeah, I think two things. It is terribly scary. And one of the things that I list in my book is that courage is not the absence of fear. Because you're afraid does not mean you're not courageous. We're not courageous when we don't move in spite of the fear. And so I would say one is that it's okay to be terrified. I was terrified through everything that I have done, through starting UNITUS, through standing in the bubble against Black Lives Matter, through not taking the vaccine. I was afraid for my future. I was afraid for my resources, but I decided to trust God anyway. And I'll go back to one of the things that my pastor told me the night before I decided to stand. I was on the phone with him, and he said to me, Jonathan, you cannot stand for God and God not stand for you. And I have seen through everything, through the times where I was terrified, but I decided to stand anyway. God has been right there to lift me, carry me, give me the grace to handle what is coming up next. And I'm grateful that I'm still in the NBA. I was able to sign my contract that I hadn't signed before I stood. I have a family. I just had a baby, my wife. So God has blessed me through it. And so it is terrible. It is hard. It is scary. But if you trust God and stand on his word, he will stand for you.
Yeah. And that's kind of wild to think about, right? Like, you went out there making a decision, right? When you have fame, you have athletic ability, you're on a team, you're in the NBA, you have all these things that you could lose potentially. That was just to take people back to that was an incredibly emotional moment, as you were mentioning, for people all over the country, all over the world. And when you're in those moments, people don't always react the best way, as you were saying. So you didn't know what was going to happen, and yet you flash forward, and here you are. You've launched UNITUS. This is happening. You've gone into this new venture. If you could sort of look ahead 5 years, and I know this is always difficult to do because none of us have crystal balls, but where do you want to see yourself? Where do you want to see UNITUS?
I want to see UNITUS as a full-fledged sports and apparel company. Right now, we have leisure wear that's out and available. You can go to weareunitus.com to grab it. But I want to influence every single sphere of sports and leisure wear. So basketball, football, baseball, all the different sports, soccer. It takes time to be able to get there. But as I look out and say, where do I want to be in 5 years? I want whatever sport you play, whatever you do, you're able to go to UNITUS for that merch, and it really to be a true alternative to things that we're seeing. So if you're already shopping with a different company, you can completely move over to UNITUS, and we have everything that you need. Again, that takes time and it's very difficult to do, but I'm invested in the process, and I want to create this for such a bigger reason than just merch and just sales. I want to have people encouraged about the values that they hold dear, and to really build a community that is strong, but also wise in the way that we go about things, the way that we speak to other people, handle other people. I want it to be something that's truly God-inspired and God-led.
Yeah, no, I love that. And that word community is so important. I think a lot of, I know that this is a fact. A lot of Christians, a lot of conservatives, you're looking at media, you're looking at Hollywood, you're looking at universities. These are not places where those ideals are going to be generally reflected in most, avenues. And so having a brand like this is incredibly important. I'm hoping we see more of these companies rise up in different sectors. You're targeting this sector. I'm super excited for that. Final question for you. You talked about the scary nature, the fear that can come from speaking up. When you look at that fear and you look at that uncertainty, how do you handle that? How have you handled the negative press, the negative reaction on social media?
Honestly, for me, the best way for me to handle it is just keep moving. My pastor tells me that all the time. I try my best not to feed into the negativity, not to even read the negativity, but sometimes it is inevitable. But I do just try to put one foot in front of the other and understand that, look, if I'm honoring God, if I'm trying my best to honor God, if I know where my heart is at and I'm continuing to ask God to purify my heart, purify my motives, then I can just keep moving and trusting him. He'll correct me if I'm wrong. And I just continue to move. So I have seen so much more positivity than negativity. But when the negativity does come, I just tell myself, Jonathan, keep moving forward.
I love that. That's a great place to end. Keep moving forward. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much, Billy. I appreciate you.